Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to another episode of Office Hours, brought to you by Infinix. My name is Stuart Newsom. I'm the Vice President of Business Development here at Infinix. And joining us today, we have Derek Taylor, who's our Senior Director of Pharmacy, who's actually also a Pharma MD. Just want to welcome Derek. Derek, how are you doing today?
Doing great, and thanks, Stuart.
Oh, awesome, awesome. Today, we're actually going to speak to strategies for specialty pharmacy success. As you can tell, Derek is our subject matter expert on that. He handles all things pharmacy for us here at Infinix. So we thought we'd bring him along and kind of talk about some of those strategies. What are some of the resources, some of the tools that is needed? Um, but before we dive into this, Derek, I really wanted to understand why is this message so significant today?
Sure. Well, specialty pharmacy really is a unique area, even within the pharmacy industry. And so it's important for these pharmacies to expand their offerings and really find and explore the tools and resources that are available in this dynamic space. A lot of the support options and strategies, are somewhat, it's hard to find them, or they're not compiled or readily available. And so we're hoping to introduce some of these tools in a good summary here for you. And then, that way you can learn about them, investigate them, and leverage some of them for your own specialty success.
Makes a lot of sense. In all my years of healthcare, I haven't come across specialty pharma very
Yeah.
often. And I like to break things down in defined terms.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get picked on for that. So just to make everything very, very clear. So can you just tell us what is specialty pharmacy exactly?
Sure. Great. So specialty pharmacy, there's, depending on who's speaking, it can be defined a little bit differently. But at least in terms of what we're speaking about today, these are pharmacies that are focused on very specialized medications. So the specialty in specialty pharmacy is that these are not your run-of-the-mill common, very well-known medications. These are specialized medications that are typically targeting complex disease states, because they are, they're more expensive in development and less people that receive them. They are high cost, high touch drugs, and then a lot of cutting edge therapy. So medications that have recently come to market. So specialty pharmacies um, really are helping in the unique needs of those types of medications. Another thing that's pretty unique to specialty pharmacy is the manufacturer themselves plays a significant role in the enrollment, delivery, follow-up of these medications, where typically the manufacturers are simply selling and distributing. Um, and that within the category of types of medications at specialty pharmacies, it's pretty broad. It can go everything from biologics and autoimmune type medications, chemotherapy agents, a lot of special, varying specialty disease states and medication types.
Oh, awesome. Wow. So that is sounds like there's involves a lot of multiple players. Is that correct?
Yeah. So unique, a little bit more unique to specialty as well is that typically the prescriber is the one who diagnoses and initiates, and then the pharmacy dispenses, and then the patient takes, right?
Mhm.
Or the nurse, administers. In this case, you have the manufacturer that has created a product, and they, as part of their, getting it out to market, they're responsible to ensure that it's going to appropriate patients, it's properly administered and stored and transported, and so um, it involves a lot more. It involves a manufacturer beginning to end in this. So the prescriber is still involved, of course, but it's a clinical role where they are performing the clinical verification or evaluation to ensure that this patient is an appropriate candidate for the medication, and that they understand, from the clinical side, the risks and benefits of the medication, and that the prescriber also helps with if there's clinical needs for authorizations, and we'll get a little bit more into those. But so the prescriber is really doing that main clinical component. The pharmacy, works as well, just to, like, pharmacies always do a verification to confirm that patient is appropriate for the medication. And then they also help the prescribers in getting the payment and authorization. And then, of course, pharmacy does storage and transportation. And then you have the patient component on this, where the patient needs to receive a lot of instruction and training to know, both in the process of being selected and getting to know the medication and how it should be given, as well as doing the documentation that it is being administered and how that happens, and then feedback. Because of the types of disease states and the new, the typical limited time in the market, oftentimes the patients need to be able to record and document and share, their symptoms or adverse reactions, as well as make sure that they're getting it appropriately. So really, it really adds quite a bit more to the workflow and who's involved in this patient care process.
Well, there's a lot to consume there for sure. So, breaking down some of these components to a little
Yeah,
more granular level, let's start with the enrollment process, or what does that involve?
sure. So let me go first off and just define one more group. I guess it's a phrase or a word that is used in the specialty space that I'll be referencing. It's called hub services. Because of the many players that normally aren't in communication, there's a broad umbrella term for services that help with that, those complications, and they're called hub services. And really, within those hub services, there are reimbursement services where you're helping in getting payment, make sure that that's going where it needs to go, and that that's not impeding the process. There's communication services, as we mentioned, that the manufacturer and the doctor and the pharmacy and the patient need to be, all in communication and could be able to have it be visual there. And then there's technology services, software tools that are used for the transparency of that workflow, as well as any of the required documentation. So these overall, all of the services that I'll be talking about today fall under that hub services umbrella. So as we get into them, yeah. So enrollment is really that first of these services. This is something that is unique as well to specialty pharmacy. So rather than just waiting for patients to show up at the doctor's office and ask about a medication or need a particular medication, manufacturers help in finding and enrolling patients. So I mean, you may hear on TV or radio a certain disease state saying you may be eligible, and so basically they enroll, or doctors can also refer patients to enrollment in these medications. But this patient, the physicians are aware of it entering the market. And so the enrollment process involves compiling and entering all the patient general, demographic information, their basic information, their billing information, if they have any payers or insurance stuff. And then, once all of that is there, they need to do the clinical requirement reviews by the prescriber. And then, basically that documentation needs to be available for the manufacturer in their system. So there are support services available that help with enrollment. Infinx does provide these services, in which we will help contacting patients to track down missing information, to do eligibility and benefits verifications, set up those patients, follow up with the prescriber to make sure that all of those details are in place, and entering it in to make sure that it's visible by the manufacturer. So that's kind of the first broad area where support services can be leveraged is through enrollment.
Nice. And it sounds like this is a lot of effort that can be alleviated by the
Yeah.
services that we provide. That just takes that burden away from our clients.
Yes, yes, for sure. And unfortunately, I mean, a lot of it is just kind of heavy lifting. You're having to, track down different things and do phone calls, et cetera. So it definitely helps alleviate that and expedite the enrollment process. So the next kind of area we refer to as reimbursement. These are very expensive medications, which developmentally there was a lot of expenses spent by the manufacturer
I
to
bet there
get those
were.
to market. I mean, and obviously the smaller number of people that are the end recipient, the higher the cost will be because that R&D and investment needs to be distributed among the end user.
Right.
So reimbursement becomes a very important step. Obviously, if we don't get paid, none of this happens. So making sure that we have the correct payers and details and plan details, which can include, patients are unreliable. Oftentimes they have coverage that they didn't give us a card for or information for. And so there's eligibility checks and different websites in which we can do additional to make sure that we're taking full we have the most accurate information of all of the benefit and payers available. And then most of these medications fall into the category of requiring a prior authorization. Um, and that's somewhat unique to specialty pharmacies. Most pharmacies will have some medications that require prior authorization, but just because of these are so specialized,
Mhm.
the payers will all require additional confirmation that this is really what's needed for that patient. And so this becomes a very large process. And so support services, this is also somewhere Infinix is able to help. So there are vendors that help provide support services on those prior authorizations, working with Cover My Meds or other payer portals in which we can determine what are the prior authorization requirements, coordinate with the prescribers to get the clinical details confirmed, documented, and submitted. Following up on those prior authorizations, oftentimes the payers don't alert the pharmacies well that there's an approval. It might go back to the doctor's office. But it may go back to the patient. But the
Mhm.
pharmacy really needs to know, obviously, to be able to dispense. And so, reaching out and following up within the the portals to find out the status of them, coordinating if there are additional denials or additional requirements, coordinating that with the prescriber to have it resubmitted. And then, of course, keeping the patient in the loop. This can be any of us that have waited for a prior authorization from from a pharmacy, to get that approval through the third party vendor knows what it just a nail biting wait it is. You're sitting there
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
waiting. So making sure that the patient is kept in the loop as to what's being done on their behalf and the status of it.
Yeah.
And then when the approval comes, right?
That's very important because I could just, everyone has that anxiety,
Yes.
that, is it going to come through? Am I going to be able to afford it? Am I going to get it on time?
Yeah.
It's bad enough that they need the medication, right?
Yeah.
But to alleviate that anxiety is just huge.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So all of these are, again, support roles that are very helpful in moving that along, making sure that priors don't get held up, and making sure everyone's kept in the loop. So the next area is really your dispensing and your delivery. Um, the chain of custody of these medications is really important. That it can be audited, and we have to show that compliance. That many of these medications require refrigeration or freezing. They have to, from the time that they're mixed or reconstituted, there may be a certain, you know, period of time where they have to be delivered and administered. So there are technology resources, software and workflow tools that will help in tracking that chain of custody. So where that medication leaves the manufacturer, where it arrives at the pharmacy or distribution center, where it leaves the pharmacy and how it's being transported, the receipt by the patient, the documentation of the administration and delivery and administration times, basically having that all in an electronic format. So those are software tools and vendors that help with that, the chain of custody on the dispensing delivery. And then there's the patient education and support. So one of the real focuses of hub service providers is to try to be one point of contact for the patient and the manufacturer. So the patient has one phone number, one group of people that they are getting trained and informed on, and the manufacturer can coordinate with the hub service provider to know where the status of these are. So the training on the medication is pretty robust. The storage of the medication, how it's administered. Some patients, need to have family members trained. Maybe they're not able to administer themselves. Getting all of that confirmed and in place, and then the risk and side effect issue is important in a lot of these medications. Oftentimes, these are medications that are very powerful, but oftentimes have side effects and some risks. And so, making sure that the patient is aware of those and that's documented, and they know what side effects to escalate. So escalation and communication of any adverse reactions or issues. What are the normal things that you may experience that you wouldn't necessarily need to call in and report? What are the things that you'd need to do where we need to escalate and report? And then reordering the medications. A lot of these are long, medications that require long therapies. So that rather than having to reach out to the pharmacy or coordinate with them, they're able to do it through these hub service portals. And then I'm sorry. Then just lastly, like we discussed earlier, that the patient also is informed of the status of their, where the medication is in the process of, that long workflow throughout to keep the patient calm and calm their anxiety and nerves, right? That they can. We all know how nice that is technologically when you can log in and see where our Amazon package is, right, and when it'll be coming. The same kind of thing, right? To keep that patient in the loop.
And often I know that from the patient end, one of the frustrating things in healthcare is that will the patient follow the directions, and will the patients follow through on taking these meds, and that's a key component, patient education, and just making it simple for them because they don't understand the clinical jargon most of the time. Maybe they're depending upon Google to get their medical expertise, right? So just that it's just very key. And then you touched on the security earlier as well. I mean, the security aspect for a lot of these meds, is it, am I going to get in a timely fashion? Well, if it's not secure, if it's going to be interrupted somehow, most of these may have expiration dates and they may spoil. So those are all key factors that tend to, help ease the patient's mindset when it comes to having to administer these medications.
Yeah, no, for sure. So, so one additional area as well is we talked a little bit about the documentation and reporting, what these requirements are. So basically, in conjunction with the tools to track that medication custody and administration and all of those types of things, is also preparing the documents and for reporting back to the FDA for their compliance team requirements. And so that is also sometimes there are service providers that help with that independent of the software, where they're experts in the reporting and compiling of the data and archiving the data to basically make sure that they can show their full compliance, beginning to end of the whole dispensing process for the FDA and for any audits.
Right. That's one continuity within healthcare is documentation.
Yep. Oh, for
It
sure.
doesn't, documentation is king
Yep.
in everything in healthcare. So if it's not documented, you could get in a lot of trouble, obviously, big trouble. Um, so one component that sticks out to me is with everything that you've just discussed, um,
Yeah.
is the risk evaluations and those
Yeah.
mitigation strategies for when a there could be some trouble. There could be a missing link in the chain, so to speak. Can
Yeah.
you elaborate on those?
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean that's definitely a vulnerability. I think that's good you brought it up. So there are, obviously there's a general risk evaluations, and then there's additional specific ones called risk evaluation and mitigation strategies. REMS is what they're and this is an elevated level of this. So the FDA for certain medications is going to require that just that simple risk benefit analysis is insufficient, and that they need to go through a more thorough formal plan with every patient on a particular medication. I think a good example of why this would be important is something like a chemotherapy agent. And so, in within, it obviously it varies depending on the type of cancer that you're treating, but for most types of cancers, there's various treatments that have been used in the past that we have good data on what those risks are and their efficiencies. And so it's not simply adding a new drug and it's, well, how does this new one compare to the previous? And the risk profile that comes with this new drug will be different. Different agents have different mechanisms of action and different pathways in which they're removed from the body, and so they impact different pathways. And so there's the risk will differ. So what's required by these formal risk evaluation mitigation strategies, REMSs, is that they have to assess the condition being treated, current alternative treatments, the benefits of a new therapeutic, the risk of a new therapeutic, and then what's referred to as risk management. And this is really important. So, um, looking at the new medication that's added, are there strategies or ways that we can minimize the risk associated with that drug? So, for example, if this is a medication that we know is cleared through the liver, we could, get initial liver function tests on all the patients prior to getting it, document that they have healthy liver function, and then perhaps, do follow-up liver function tests every, 3 months or every month. Um, Basically clinically assessing and, working with the prescriber and the manufacturer based on what they know about the medication to have a risk management plan as
Mhm.
well. And then all of that has to be documented and reported back to the FDA. So
Of course.
anytime we're dealing with government agencies, and there's forms and formats that all need to be managed. So there are companies that specifically do just this. This is the service that they provide, is helping with these REMS requirements.
Yeah. All goes back to documentation.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. So.
So who's paying for all this? There's a lot going on here.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very great question. Yeah. So it really it depends on who's really responsible for that area of the service provided. So if we look at like things like enrollment, the manufacturer, they're the ones that oversee that process. So typically the manufacturer will contract enrollment services. Sometimes they make that um, part of their contract with the pharmacies, but typically it's the manufacturer that oversees it. If we're looking at like software workflow tools for the general hub services, typically that's also the manufacturer,
Okay.
because they're going to try to find the solution for, to be able to include in the different pharmacy and prescriber systems. Excuse me. And then patient education and support will be the manufacturer. They're the ones that are responsible to ensure that's done right. So delivery administration and tracking and the reporting, typically that's the manufacturer. Sometimes pharmacies have some tracking tools they can use, but more the manufacturer typically, if they're contracting it privately, will be the one on that. Pharmacies, what they subcontract, and this falls into a lot of the stuff that we do at Infinx, patient onboarding, prior authorization, coordination and support, really kind of initiating priors, coordination of the clinical information, the stuff that we discussed. And then the pharmacy also typically will be the ones contracting the REMS services. Even though it's required by the manufacturer, a lot of times the components of that evaluation are handled through the pharmacy side. So I guess that one typically is pharmacy. It could be the manufacturer. Anyway, so yeah, lots of people end up spending lots of money to help get this done right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, at least that's definitely sounds like there's people have put a lot of thought in this, and
Yeah.
how who's going to be responsible for what. It actually, helps the manufacturer to be involved. Obviously, the pharmacy as
Yep.
well, helps them process. One thing that always tends to get in the way, from my point of view, it doesn't matter what aspect of healthcare or anything, is the technology side.
Mhm.
And speaking of that, what advice can you give regarding vendors and some of the technical challenges, that
Okay.
that could arise out there?
Yeah. So, well, that's a great question. So, in dealing with vendors in this space, obviously the great majority of these vendors are remote. They're working, from outside and helping within your network and your system. So, um, the standard IT security parameters and concerns, is something you'd want to be very diligent in vetting your vendors. And the general rules that we should all be following is, independently audited, transparent security parameters. So, what are their security parameters? Are they, auditing it independently from, a third party, and, will they share that with it? Additionally, they should be willing to comply to your security parameters. They're going to be coming into your network. You should have full control of who access your network and patient data, and be able to terminate that at any point if there's a breach or any concerns there. And so really doing your due diligence on the IT side, that
Mhm.
any vendor should be able to show you their documentation and speak at a high level of that. If they don't, that should be a big red flag.
Right, right.
A second level, which is similar, is your HIPAA compliance. So you'd want to make sure that you first off have a BAA in place with these vendors, to allow them to access patient data. And then the requirement is that that they have to be HIPAA trained to be following the HIPAA guidelines. And so, does the vendor have their own HIPAA compliance program that's independently audited, and can they share that with you? Additionally, are they willing to follow your program as well, and do HIPAA training for their team members within your HIPAA guidelines? And so I think that's definitely something that I would recommend, and that I think reputable vendors will comply with. Um, of course, you want to make sure that the vendors can provide the services you're interested in. As you can see, there's a large variety of services,
Hmm.
and to my best knowledge, there's not a single one hub service provider that hits everything, right?
Right.
Each one of them have various degrees of capability in different areas, and so you want to do that research, including asking for references, make sure that they are able to they are currently providing the exact services that you're looking for. And then of course scale and size. Some of these pharmacy contracts that you'll get for, so a particular medication, the manufacturer might contract one pharmacy for them. And it's like you go from 0 to 100 miles an hour. All of a sudden you have, all these patients you need to onboard and dispense, and making sure that the company that you're using, or companies that you're using for these services, they are size and scale appropriate to what your needs are going to be, or what your needs are. So again, that's something that you can verify through references. They should be able to provide similar, scale and scope references. Additionally, your contracts, it's appropriate to include those SLAs in your contracts to protect you in
Yeah.
that rare instance that they're not able to deliver, that at least financially you're not going to be on the hook for them not being able to provide what they're committing to. So contractually have those in there.
Wow. So there's a lot of due diligence
Yeah.
involved for sure. Some of the standard due diligence you would do with, say, if
Yep.
you were looking for EHR
Yep.
or a billing system or a clearinghouse. I think most providers out there are used to that. But yes, it's always smart to make sure you do that due diligence to investigate and look into those vendors. But
Yep.
with that said, are there other tools, especially pharmacies, can take advantage of?
Sure, sure. Yeah. And so some of these are, I think, if you're in that space already, I think you're going to be somewhat aware of them. But if one of those is I mentioned that some of the pharmacies have delivery uh, chain of custody tools already in place. There are a lot of pharmacy information systems out there. Some specialty pharmacies like to use or prefer to use a retail pharmacy software. Some prefer to use long-term care pharmacy. There are a few specialty pharmacy software out there as well. Um, One of the benefits of a lot of times the long-term care pharmacy softwares is they already have some of those chain of custody tools involved, and they're included in their software. So it's not an additional cost for the pharmacies. So if you're getting into this space and are vetting different pharmacy information system software vendors, that's definitely something that would be good to look at and see how robust that is. From the inventory receipt all the way through the patient. They have barcode scanning that you take pictures of the delivery, or have an electronic signature from the patient that documents the time of delivery. So that's something that would be, instead of having to subcontract someone, if you have a software that has that, that's really nice. Some of the other software tools that you can find that are helpful is some will have the EMR interfaces with the prescriber systems. So if you know that the doctors in a particular group that you'll be working with are using a particular EMR, you can see if your pharmacy information system has an interface. What's beneficial there is you can get access to clinical information in helping with prior authorizations and other things like that. And then also there's some of the pharmacy information systems have some user-friendly, maybe web apps or um, like phone apps where you can manage your refill requests and some basic communication that's HIPAA compliant. So some of that might be helpful. But basically leveraging or looking at your pharmacy information system capabilities and see if any of these other functions that we know are required are available in your system. That can be useful because it's all integrated. I mentioned Cover My Meds, so it's a great website. It's a great resource. I think if you're already in the space, you're probably familiar with it. But what's nice about it is that it's a repository of all of the by payer and by drug. You can find exactly the current prior authorization form, and it integrates with most pharmacy information systems to where the demographic information can populate over. It coordinates with the physician, the prescribing physician. So you don't need to alert them that you've submitted a prior authorization or send them a request. They get notified and know that there's a few additional, clinical information pending. When the prescriber does add and complete it and submit the clinical information, the pharmacy can see that it's been submitted, and then when the denials come across, they can see that they're denied, and it's free. So it's become the standard preferred website in for helping to manage that complicate all those complications with regards to what's the right PA for this payer and this med. And then it even has some tools to help escalate denied claims. So that's something definitely, if you're not using, or I would look into it. A lot of prescribers are also used to using it. Just with the other pharmacies around. And then there's So unique to specialty pharmacy, oftentimes the manufacturers will contract just with one pharmacy group for a particular medication. So there's one pharmacy that will be doing the oversight in it. And so there are some uh, groups called specialty pharmacy providers, SPPs, that really are there to help pharmacies, specialty pharmacies, gain access to these types of limited production medication contracts. So they coordinate between the manufacturers to pair them up, with pharmacies and vice versa. Almost like agents for the pharmacy to help
Mhm.
you get the deal or get the a particular medication. So that can be useful in trying to navigate how to get those contracts or find drugs that you can get exclusivity for.
Oh,
Yeah.
awesome. Awesome. Well, that wraps up some things, but before we close out, just wanted to take a look and see if there's any questions. We're going to open up our Q&A. So I encourage all participants to enter a question if you have anything um, that was discussed you want more clarity on, or if there's something that wasn't discussed that you want to address. We do have one question, and I think it's a pretty good question, and it is speaking to technology. How can specialty pharmacy stay ahead in understanding or implementing new technology? Because technology changes. It's one of those
Yeah.
things where I've been doing this a long time. I can remember when it was character-based screens,
Mhm.
and you got your updates on 5.25-inch floppy disk. So
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
aging myself there. So, but it, yeah, so that's a good question. How do they stay ahead of implementing any of these new technologies? And does it change that often?
Yeah, yeah. So for sure, this is a constantly changing marketplace. Specialty pharmacy itself is, new within just the last, just over a decade. Um, and so the technologies, there's a lot of companies recognizing the technological needs out there, and they're creating products to try to fill those gaps and help aid in those pain points. Um, so really the main way that pharmacies can keep in aware of what tools or resources is one going to the conferences that are specific to specialty pharmacy. So you need to be getting continuing education credits as well and other things. So going to these conventions is helpful, but they typically their focus primarily on these conferences is to bring in
Mhm.
industry leaders to talk about what's new in the market, what's available, what are the resources, and then oftentimes the individual suppliers, those who these hub service providers or other contractors will have booths at the conventions, which facilitate a face-to-face interaction, a lot of specific questions. Some of them will also even have kind of training hours or different things that really allow you to get your foot in the door, see what there is with limited investment. It's all brings it all together into one place. So that's really what most of the pharmacies depend on, is hitting two or three of these the most the largest specialty pharmacy conferences. There are also groups, that issue newsletters or, their podcasts on specialty pharmacy as well that try to highlight some of those as well. So keeping subscribed or and listen. Most of those newsletters or podcasts are free,
Mhm.
and so kind of just checking in on those and listening and seeing. It can give you at least introduction, similar to like what I did, a quick introduction to different things that are available, to have it be on your radar. And typically if you're doing both of those things, there's not a lot of the new tech that's going to slip by, right? They're trying to advertise to get it in your hand.
Right.
So if you're
Absolutely.
doing those things, you'll typically hear about it.
And then the competition always drives that as well.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah.
competition drivers, competitive drivers.
Yep,
So
yep, for
yeah, and
sure.
so if for what you've already covered, has really been for those they probably already exist in the specialty pharma world. But let's say if there's an organization that wants to expand into specialty pharma, um, is there anything other than what you've already said that could be some advice on how to get started, which
Yeah,
to
yeah.
me would
It's
be a huge undertaking.
yeah. I mean, it's I've seen both retail pharmacies, expand into specialty, as well as long-term care pharmacies expand into specialty. Um, both are complicated in that there's the workflow and the requirements are significantly different. But one thing that is nice is within the specialty space, you can get, just do one contract or, one medication if you can get some of those smaller ones, which kind of allows you to work in that space without getting overwhelmed.
Yeah,
Um, it's, in order to get approved for, some of the more common medications or getting the approved, lists, you can work your way and do that. Um, but I mean, yeah, so I mean, I don't know if I have any great advice there other than
right, right.
see if there's an opportunity to start small.
Yeah.
Just because it's a lot, but um, yeah. Okay. Sorry, that's not a
Yeah,
great answer.
no, yeah. No, it's a great answer because I think, starting small, getting in gradually,
Yeah.
because one of the points you made earlier was you can get inundated with all these patients now,
Yeah.
and that they're sent, that the manufacturer's sending to you, and also make sure you do your due diligence with, everything. So that could take a long time and understanding, going to the conventions, getting a feel, for, get educated on that. So absolutely. Well, I don't think there's any other questions for the day. So we'll wrap things up. Derek, thank you so much for
Yes, of
joining
course, my
us
pleasure.
today. I learned something new today, I can say. You're supposed to learn
Well,
something
good,
today, and
good. Hopefully that's the
check
case.
that off
Good.
our list here for me. But I really contribution and all and your knowledge, not only on on this podcast as well as with Office Hours episode, but just what you bring for Infinix as well and for our clients, and the expertise you bring them. So hope to have you again,
Sure.
very, very soon. And for that, we'll stay tuned. We'll have office hour session next week. Be sure that you sign up for that as soon as possible and be on the lookout for what that topic will be. And we're looking forward to see you next time. Thanks for all who joined us.
Thank you.